All right, we are on the mic. Today we have one of our new panel guests, Daniel, or DP, as we call him generally. So what's on our agenda today, Dwight?
We got public intellectuals, we got the national debt, we got guns, internet censorship, and the climate.
Oh my, that's a big one.
There's a lot.
All right, where do you guys want to start?
I think we should start with public intellectuals since we've been kind of talking about that all morning already.
That's fair. That's fair.
So,
were we starting with intellectual dark web?
I think
Sure,
I think it's good to define what who we're talking about.
Yes, so let's define what the intellectual dark web is. So I mean, my understanding of it is it's essentially a network of public intellectuals that kind of there's a lot of them appearing on each other's shows and discussing topics together. It should be noted that they've gotten some attacks from the mainstream media. So like the New York Times put out an article about them, essentially saying there's a lot of connection to like the alt-right and stuff like that through that network. I think there's a little truth in that, but I think it's generally just kind of an attack on non-mainstream, political narratives.
yeah, I would say that that's probably an effort to put them in a box and say,
For sure.
don't listen to these
And they're
guys.
doing that. They're doing that on both sides of the political spectrum,
Yeah.
where they're like, you're not complying with the mainstream, narrative, so you're not allowed.
And that's really what I would say defines them, is the fact that they're sort of willing to talk about almost anything.
True.
They don't seem to be afraid of the recourse that might come from the norm.
And that's why they're so popular, is because a lot of people are looking for that unfiltered discussion of the difficult issues of the day.
Definitely.
So that's a really important point.
Yeah.
And I think we should have more people across the political spectrum wanting to be part of that conversation rather than trying to silence it.
Yep.
And that's going to get into censorship in general, which is a big problem right now.
Definitely.
But you guys probably listen to the people in this particular category more than I do, so why don't you guys go ahead and describe some of the members?
Yeah, I mean, number one, the intellectual dark web actually has a website. So,
oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
You can go on and see everyone who's in it, but it contains like people like, what's Ruben's first name?
Oh, Dave Rubin.
Dave Rubin. It has Joe Rogan in it. He's technically in it. Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, the Weinstein brothers, so Eric and Brett. Brett's wife,
Heather Hang.
We should say we're going to be getting more into the substance of each of these people, because I definitely come from a much more left-wing perspective, and a lot of these people I strongly disagree with a lot of their positions. But
totally. But I think one of the coolest things, I recommend anyone who's listening to definitely check them out, because they're very intelligent people who are willing to really go deep into like the minutia of all of the conversations that are happening, like socially and stuff like that. Because one of the reason why I like them is there's a lot of social issues that are going on right now that I feel are very polarized and not very deep, and they're not looking for how to compromise or how to actually do anything about it. It seems like more of a tribe mentality,
right,
where they're trying to just fight each other.
The other group down. And
these guys actually talk about, just recently I saw one where Eric Weinstein was on Rubin, and the big thing that he said was he wants to get the dark web to now talk about how to actually fix the issues by steel manning the opposite side, which is another huge thing that they've contributed to.
It's a really good development.
Exactly.
In terms of political debate.
Totally. And actually, he's trying to hold the others accountable, too.
So, for those listening, steel man, the idea is, as opposed to straw man, where you recreate your opponent's argument in a intentionally weak and dishonest way to undermine their position, steel man is you try to present their opinion in the strongest way possible so that the two parties can agree on that position, and then you start from that position of strength of argument to have your debate, and it's a lot healthier.
Totally.
Anyway.
So, yeah, I mean, that was the other really big thing that I think is important, I was thinking about this, is that the discussions are continuous, and they are constantly updating. So if someone comes up with a good idea, they're like, oh man, we're the whole idea of steel manning, that wasn't necessarily I don't even know if philosophically that's a term, but they keep creating new terms that they like to use in a way that they think progresses discussion.
And I think that's an excellent example of where that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good development. I've included that in my own vernacular now.
Totally. So That's like, I was thinking about it in terms of, these are, for me, I see them as like the philosophers of our time. And so they are, one of the cool things is it's not like they wrote a book that you'll later come back, that you'll read, like Plato's Republic or something like that, and then you'll be able to critique it. It's like they are constantly critiquing their own arguments and each other's arguments, and you get to see them develop. So they're not like, they're never like, this is the truth. They're like, we're going to continue talking about this until we can get to the truth. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's really inspiring.
So, go ahead, Dwight.
It looks like that Steelman comes from Daniel Dennett originally. Possibly.
Okay, yeah.
So one thing that
modern day philosophy
that I definitely have a critique of the intellectual dark web is that I think the strongest left-wing philosophers of our time, none of them are included, and I think that does tilt the discussion in a right-wing direction. So like the left-leaning people in the intellectual dark web, so like Sam Harris or Brett Weinstein, I think those people are more establishment in their left-wing views. Whereas, like, the more leftist people, so say Noam Chomsky, Chris Hedges, Richard Wolff, people like that aren't part of this network. And a lot of times I find people in this network making arguments that I wish, I just want to see debates happen with these people. So actually, Richard Wolff just put out a challenge to debate Jordan Peterson anytime, anywhere on Marxism.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
I hope that happens.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that I've seen is most all of the people within the intellectual dark web are they call themselves centrists. So
yeah, I noticed that.
They are not going to be your extremists or obviously the more progressive, the most progressive people, right. I guess. But they're trying, they're really trying to hold on to the like actual discussion between the two sides.
Right.
So you do get, and they're obviously more like on the intellectual side of things. They're not. They do try, they go into social ideas, like the more like transgender or something like that, but it's not necessarily like, let's reevaluate our whole capitalistic system, or let's reevaluate these really underpinning things for society.
I mean, we should elaborate that people like Jordan Peterson, talks extensively about things like Marxism, why he thinks
bad.
that doesn't work, why he thinks it's psychologically bad.
Yeah.
And so to not include, the foremost Marxist professor in the United States in that discussion, I think is a huge blind spot.
Well, it's also, it doesn't seem to me like they're purposely excluding them.
Yeah,
exactly. No, for sure.
So
don't get me wrong. I don't think that's
they're talking to people that they can and that are around, and then I'd be interested to see if Jordan Peterson does.
Dude, I would be very surprised if he didn't, because if a reporter comes from somewhere and is like, I want to talk to you, he's usually pretty open to at least having an online discussion. So
it seems much to his chagrin, he's regretted, because some of these reporters are just trying to do a hack job. So.
Yeah.
Well, who decides like who's part of the intellectual dark web?
I don't think there's like a decision.
Who's the coined?
I think it's just an association of people.
It's kind of in groupy. They talk.
Weinstein coined the term.
Yeah, and they talk about people. Okay, normally a really big one is like they get pilloried, which is like basically
What's that?
Pilloried is another term that they say is like they get pilloried by the media. So the idea is that they've said something extreme, and then there's some social media or like establishment media that interviews them and tries to destroy them by like strawmanning their arguments, but also trying to associate them with like these
extremists.
Super extreme negative extremists. Yeah. And then they're like, they usually do really well in arguing the opposite of that. So like defending themselves and being able to be in a like logical frame of mind. So like the idea that Brett was like had students come into his room and like call him all of these like call him a racist, and they were literally like they were protesting in his classroom while he was giving a lecture, and then he actually talked him down. Exactly. Same with Jordan Peterson, who was really against the hate crime bill C-16 in Canada, and there was a bunch of protests at the school, and all of the people he would try to have a conversation with and be like, I'm not racist. I'm not, I'm not a terrible person. This is why I think this is an impingement of freedom of speech, and it's not okay. And that's why I'm not going to do it.
Well, give a little background on, what was that incident about?
The C-16 one?
Yeah.
Okay, so C-16 was a bill that was put forth in Canada about attaching the compulsory speech of individuals who were speaking to a transgendered individual who wanted to be called
So
by
you have to
their
use
chosen
the
name.
term that they've chosen.
Exactly.
And he was saying that's an infringement on freedom of speech because you're requiring me to
Exactly.
say certain things.
And
right.
it was the big thing for him was that it was clearly that either the individuals who wrote the law didn't understand the implications of it, or they were directly being like untruthful about what it was, because they were like, oh, you won't get any jail time by it, and he was like, no, you literally will get jail time. You can fine me if I don't. You can, like, because of the way the hate crime laws that were created, you could literally face jail time for just not calling someone something that they wanted to be called.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So he was just like, no, this isn't okay. And like,
It's different than like going out and like verbally assaulting someone. That's like,
Yeah.
I was just minding my own business, and you're saying I have to use certain words when I
Exactly.
speak to you.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because so Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein sort of share that in that they sort of share that narrative in that they got rocketed into like their fame by these controversial incidents. So Jordan Peterson was opposing that bill. Brett Weinstein and his wife Heather Heng were opposing the idea that at Evergreen College they had this day of absence that was a tradition from like the 1970s or something, where all the people of color would just not show up for class one day, and the administration wanted to flip that and say that all of the white people were not able to show up for class that day.
Right.
And so Brett Weinstein and his wife both spoke out against that, and they were like, this is racist and I'm not going to do it. And they got, that's where these protests happened, and they essentially got ran out of the college, and they ended up settling with the college.
Yeah, that's an interesting dilemma, because it seems the whole thing started with the idea of like, a movement among students of color to say, a day of absence where we're not going to come to school so you can feel the absence of, that diverse section of the community, because we've been historically disenfranchised, so it's kind of like a political statement.
It came from a play, also. I can't remember the name of the play, but there's a play that all the black people in the town decided not to show up for the day, and that
Totally.
wreaked havoc and whatnot.
Yeah, which is, I think that's great. Yeah. But the idea of telling a group of people they can't come to school, obviously that's crossing the line.
And there were a bunch of other
no matter
little
what
things.
group it is, telling them they can't is, I think, unacceptable.
There were a bunch of other little things that came out about that whole thing later, where there would be some sort of gathering where a white person would come in and they would not be allowed to sit in certain places or eat certain types of food. Well, and it's just like, how is that even remotely okay?
I think this is like the coolest part for me for like the intellectual dark web is that they've shown that this idea of progressive movements, of like social movements, there is this underlying like concern for people's rights that goes to the point of impinging on other people's rights, where these like really liberal leaning people don't realize that they're getting into like fascist tendencies.
Or they do.
So,
I think just authoritarian.
Okay,
be careful with
sure,
saying fascist.
sure, fine, authoritarian,
right?
Fine.
Yeah.
Then I think that's better. So, but it's
very authoritarian.
Very.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I'm hugely anti-authoritarian, as anyone who's been listening so far would know.
Which, I can't imagine that if you went up and talked to those individuals and said you're being authoritarian, they'd be like, oh yeah, I totally think that.
Right.
It's like almost always they're like coming from a place of like where they've gone through some shit, they feel like they've been like oppressed in some way, and they feel like they want to, make everything even in that egalitarian way. But to the point where it is an authoritarian, it's an enforced.
Right, and I definitely want to get into that when I have like a deep dive I want to do on some of my disagreements with Jordan Peterson, which will go into some of this stuff and that development on the left. But I don't know if I really want to do that yet because I don't want to hog it. But
well, unless anyone else has anything to say right now, I would say that's fine.
I mean, Daniel and Sean, have you guys listened to these guys much? Like, who have you guys listened to?
I know Joe Rogan and Sam Harris, and then the brothers. But yeah, some of these people I haven't even heard of.
Yeah.
So I just need to do.
And I've just recently heard of
research.
them for sure.
It sounds like the problem is that they're getting put into these boxes when
Right.
they're really, most of them are just in the middle, and they're just trying to understand the world.
Well, and I think the biggest thing is they're not to be put in boxes.
Yes.
yeah,
that's-
no one should.
That's one of the biggest things that I notice about them is there's two big things. One is that they constantly get misquoted and taken out of context, especially Sam Harris. I think he's the most commonly
I've
abused
heard
in that
that.
regard
Yeah.
because he's and he actually sets himself up for it really, really well because he will go into these crazy thought experiments where he sets up this idea and he creates this extreme world and then he talks about what would happen in that world. And so then people just take what he said about without any of the setup and they say,
That's
oh,
what he wants.
Sam
to do.
Harris said we should nuke the Saudis. And
See?
it's like, that's not even close to what he said at all.
So that's going to be something we're going to talk about later, because I do think he gets into some really irresponsible issues sometimes. But
And I think he's becoming aware of that because, like,
I hope
even-
so.
They had some discussions with Jordan Peterson and him, and with
I
Brett
haven't watched those.
Weinstein.
That'd be
And
interesting.
oh yeah, you should, because that's, again, this is like the adaptation that I'm talking about that they do. Is like Sam has looks at the crowd and says like, "Go ahead and misquote me on Twitter." It literally says like that
Yeah.
kind of thing. It's like this is
So
going to be a
used to it.
section
Yeah.
where they will try to misquote me.
Right.
So he's becoming aware. But
Definitely. But the other thing that I was going to say about them is that they all do hold views that don't really fit into a box very well.
Mhm.
Especially
Yeah.
Sam Harris. I mean, I can't even say that.
You do
Especially
find a
all of them.
lot of, and that's kind of like opposed to the nature of the age we're in because it's so tribal, and the
Yeah.
idea of people holding views that are kind of, not easy to put on a team, I think makes people who are so team oriented very uncomfortable.
Definitely. And Sam Harris points out a really good thing about that. He's like, the fact that your views on healthcare can reliably predict your views on gun control is a problem because those are not related and they shouldn't be. And so, it makes it so that people get in this idea where they think they're a Democrat and they're like, okay, well, what do Democrats believe? And then they sort of adopt those beliefs and become this tribe when
Right.
it makes so much more sense to have views on either side in a lot of cases.
Well, that's what I see a lot with the two-party system that we
Mhm.
have. Yeah, it's like if you're a Democrat, that means you want to get take everyone's guns away, which
Mhm.
that shouldn't be that way. You should be able to own guns, be a Democrat. You should I feel like it's caused a lot of divide within our country.
Yeah,
I agree.
but that is, like you said, is part and parcel to the political system we
Yep,
have,
definitely.
and them steering their bases to be as angry at the other base as possible because that generates votes, and they're able to steer the debate by getting people all riled up.
And it's
over
just what
certain
Trump
things.
said in his rally in Nevada, that Democrats are an angry, uncontrolled, unhinged mob.
Yeah, look in the mirror, buddy.
And it's like, Republicans are the same. That's a two-party system. You get two crazy mobs that just go after each other.
Well, and anyone who points to one side or the other as being the mob really weirds me out. Because, I mean, if you look, it's happening all over the country, like the clashes between Antifa and the Proud Boys. I mean, these are similar kinds of people or people reacting in a similar way, and they just have a different jersey on.
Yeah.
That's really
Exactly.
what
And I
it is.
think it harkens to why, the intellectual dark web is this coined phrase anyway. I mean, it's I think people who have ever been interested in a particular subject, if they've got the gumption, will pursue the intellectuals that have existed in the field already.
Definitely.
It's these are convenient modern day ones packaged in mainstream media, and so we all have access to them. And I think what a bigger issue is why they're so popular,
Mhm.
in this mainstream outlet. It must harken to this inherent desire of everyone
Definitely.
trying to find out more information, and I think it's cool that they're all there, and it's I listen to several of them. I listen to Jordan Peterson mainly, but I kind of slowed down on listening to them. You know what I mean? Because at the same time, I'm like, what am I looking for? You know what I mean by listening to these guys? I think it's why are these guys so popular for the
Mhm.
masses? And it's that search. It's this there's this mass energy in our culture for trying to understand what's going on and have a better grip on it. And it's I don't know. I like what most of these guys are doing, and I like the format and like the discussions they're all having and stuff too. But I just worry it might lead down a path of just like, almost of like this false reverence for Jordan Peterson or something like that, where it's like, you now base all of your philosophy. Yeah.
Okay, something that's really concerning me.
Sorry, not to cut you off, but I just want to say they're definitely not in the mainstream media, though. That's kind of one of the things that makes them different. They all have podcasts and stuff. That they go on each other's podcasts. Like,
what are we defining as that then?
Like what I am seeing though is people who
mainstream
are
media. Yeah, that's like CNN,
so
Fox,
TV nations, TV networks.
MSNBC.
So YouTube doesn't count as mainstream media.
No. So or if they're appearing on like mainstream journalistic outlets, so like Washington Post, New York Times.
Well, the idea is that these individuals put out their own videos on. Yes, they do. They choose a source to do that, which would be YouTube, because it is like one of the number one things. And then through their discussions or argumentations, people like them, so they watch them a lot, and they're like, "Oh, I agree with you. It's not doctored to be like this is the narrative," because like CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all are like, "This is what we're telling you is true."
If that was part of exclusively the definition of it, then I think we've all realized that
those are all invalidated.
That news, that corporate news outlets are very, very like not great.
And I would say that we in this room definitely, but
we should also say statistically, young people are recognized.
Okay, and statistically,
young people get most of their news from online sources, and I think it's like people over 45. I think get most of their news.
You mean
not? It's diversified, so they do get some of their news from those sources, but they also seek independent outlets.
Totally.
Because they're online and it's easy.
Yeah.
Whereas people, I think, 45 and over, were getting their news almost exclusively from cable news.
Right? Totally.
So that's that purely in wheelhouse, establishment narrative.
Yeah.
As opposed to adding the diversification of independent outlets.
For sure. What were you going to say about?
So one of the things I've seen, and I don't think this is necessarily something that only these people are subject to. But there is a tendency to have people just kind of use these public intellectuals to justify tribalism they already had. So, like, I see a lot of people... So, like, one of the sites I follow, Democracy at Work, which anyone who's been following up to this point knows they advocate for the workplace to be co-owned and democratically run by the workers. I see people posting Jordan Peterson arguments against Marxism in there. So don't get me wrong, this view comes from a Marxist critique of capitalism.
Yeah,
but what they're saying is, you just want equality of outcome.
Right.
You just want equality of outcome, which is something Jordan Peterson hits all the time. But this particular point of view has nothing to do with equality of outcome.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with any authoritarian structure of any kind.
Right.
But they're just saying, I'm on the right. I believe Marxism is bad. Jordan Peterson told me Marxism is bad. Here's a talking point. Anyone who says anything about Marx, here's my talking points, and you're on the other team.
Totally, and I feel like that's such a cherry picking of these individuals' ideas,
right?
Just to recapitulate.
But I think that's also part of the concern that's happening. Is I think people are only seeing how people on what they've recognized as the other team are touting certain intellectual figures to perpetuate their tribal affiliation.
Right.
So that's an interesting problem as well.
I know, but that one I feel like is so difficult because
it's
all you can
difficult.
do is encourage the people to be like, okay, let me listen to who these people talk to. Because when they get together, you get people like, you'll get Jordan Peterson in with Brett Weinstein, in with Eric Weinstein, and they'll talk about those situations.
Or even Ben Shapiro, who's a Republican. But one thing I wanted to say about that is that I think using that as an argument against which it seems like that's framed as an argument against the intellectual dark web.
I don't think it is.
People do that shit all the time with everything. That's just people being retarded.
Exactly.
And you can't ascribe that to anything in particular. Like, just because... Yeah, they're being retarded. They're taking that argument out of context, and it doesn't mean anything in that context. I say that's retarded, personally. Because they don't understand what they're saying, and they're just parroting it back like it means something in this context when it doesn't. Right? So that to me is being stupid. Okay? So I think...
For being politically correct, that's probably a better word. That's something.
That's the only thing.
Stupid's better than retarded.
I choose not to say it, but it's whatever.
It's like midget.
Because it is
Yeah.
like a disorder.
Well,
it's
we
like
can talk about
it's like
political
a
correctness on another one
disability
because
as
I
opposed to
avidly
being dumb.
disagree with political correct culture. So you'll hear that. when I
I'm
talk
mostly
a
disagreeing
lot.
with it. I think there's a little validity. But anyway.
Yeah. So anywho,
We're
what
sorry.
I'm saying,
If
what I'm
anyone
saying
got
though,
offended,
is
we're
just
sorry.
that I'm not sorry. Is that
I still love you, Dwight.
Great. I'm just saying that I don't think that's really a valid critique of Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, or any of these people
Definitely.
because that's just other people taking their views out of context and using them
Yeah.
for. And when people do that with anything. So.
Yeah, I do think that's where a big part of that concern is coming from. Is from within that tribal camp, seeing that, and then trying to put you on the other team.
Yeah.
I do think these people should probably maybe speak a little bit more to like who their audiences are, and maybe try and separate themselves from certain sects of it that they disagree with. I don't know if that's happening
Oh yeah,
very much.
they've talked about how they've all been represented as like supporters of the alt-right, and they're all like, yeah, this is the reason why, and it's ridiculous.
See, it is interesting though, because like
They've not.
I don't want to talk to who this person is, but I know someone who's like pretty fascistic.
Yeah.
And like super right wing Trump, hardcore authoritarian right wing.
Yeah.
And I heard him not in a very intellectual way, but using some of the things Jordan Peterson said to justify his positions.
No, totally.
And so, that's going to happen no matter who we're talking about.
Exactly.
And it's just important for public intellectuals to speak directly if they
agree.
see that association occurring.
But it's also interesting because what we were talking about earlier of, kind of trying to get away from the idea of tribalism.
Yeah.
That's going back to a lot of it. It's saying like,
Mhm.
oh, I don't support the alt-right. It's like, well, maybe you do in some cases. I
Let's
don't think
be more
that they
specific than
I don't
saying
think
a
that
group
they,
like that.
yeah, I don't think that they need to do that. I think they should be able to represent their own views, and wherever they match up with other people being crazy and tribal, I don't think that's their problem.
They are totally okay with saying they don't support anything alt-right, though.
Yeah,
they
they-
literally
okay,
will
so
be
they-
like, they're like, because like, there's even like examples of Jordan Peterson on camera, because that's another huge thing, is like, he puts like his whole freaking life on camera.
Yeah.
But he's like at the Bill C-16 rallies, like for the transgender people attacking him, really was like, they were like, what do you say about Nazis being here? Are you a Nazi supporter? And he was like, no, I don't want Nazis here.
Yeah, I
if
did
I
see
find
that.
them, take them away.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want them here. And if anyone commits any violence, then I want them not here. That's
Yeah.
not okay. And it's just like,
So that's
yeah.
good. That's
But-
good shit.
But that, I mean, he said that on camera, and then you'll still see after that people sourcing him as like an
Right.
alt-right supporter. So it's
Well, and
just,
this happens across the board, and it can be very nefarious. So, I mean, like, they did the same thing during the 2016 election, is like, they would smear Bernie because,
Right.
certain Bernie supporters, they said, were, being sexist towards Hillary.
Totally.
There's this whole Bernie bro narrative. It's like, oh, you're a Bernie bro. You don't support Hillary, so you're sexist because you support Bernie. It's like, what are you talking about? I want universal health care and free college and not going to war and fixing climate change. Like, those are my issues.
yeah,
And no corporate money in politics. That's why.
yeah,
It's just
right.
like, yeah. Okay, so I'm a guy and I vote for Bernie, so I'm sexist. Okay,
People
cool.
do that kind of shit all the time, and they just want to push people's ideas off into a corner and
Yeah.
debase them. And that I think is a huge problem. But
We gotta have the facilities to be prepared to deal with challenging viewpoints too.
Yeah.
It's a reflex to do that.
Yes.
So you can't like blame them necessarily 100%.
definitely.
Again, it's like you hearken again to the bigger issue of these intellectual pursuits. It's like what are people trying to get out of like these intellectual pursuits?
Totally.
What do they need to validate in themselves? That's the thing. It's like everyone's seeking like this validation for their position,
Yes.
their philosophy, this outlook on life, and it's like it's just like in our culture, it's like almost 95% an intellectual pursuit, and it's like I don't know. It's just like it's great to have like rational like discussions about stuff and like what are the individual like points of a dude and who is in the club of the intellectual dark web or whatever and who's not, and like why there is a distinction between that anyways, and there's already something weird going on with that, obviously, you know. So
it
it's
was originally very, very informal.
yeah.
Eric Weinstein was just talking about how there's sort of become this group of people
Yeah.
that have been passing.
Well, if
around
it's that,
podcasts
if it's
and
that's
talking.
not how it started, that's not where it's at now. There is something kind of weird, you know. There's like a website.
Well, we
you
want
know,
to
I
say
guess.
this has all happened in
anyway,
literally
yeah.
a year.
Yeah, so
And
there's
they
a lot of
are
room for
talking
development.
of each other like constantly. So they're like, we need a name for the like.
Yeah.
We have this like we're on the mic. It's
One-
like we
one-
need a name for our thing that
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah.
It's an
it's
association of
intellectual
individuals.
Yeah. It
But-
doesn't seem like it's exclusive. to
One
me.
thing that
Well, no.
bothers me about
Yeah,
it, though, when I say that I don't think
I
there's,
guess I need to finish.
sorry, what's that?
No, it's fine. Keep
Oh,
going.
okay. So one thing that definitely bothers me about it, when I was saying that I don't think there's a left wing representation there, is I don't think there's any individual in the intellectual dark web who's fundamentally anti-capitalist, and I think that's a huge fucking blind spot. They're all pro-capitalism, every single one of them, even the ones who say they're left wing. So that is a right-leaning overall perspective that I really wish was being challenged more, because there's an echo chamber in terms of saying capitalism is okay and good and we all agree. You know, it's just a matter of should it be more left-wing regulated or, you know, more free market, which is a closed dialogue that doesn't take into account the full spectrum of debate right now at all.
Yeah. Again, though, I think that's sort of an unfair criticism because it's not this contrived group. They didn't
For
sit
sure.
down and say like, "Oh, we need to get people on all these issues that have."
I'm
different
not.
ideas,"
I'm
you
not
know
even
what I mean?
criticizing them
Okay.
or saying that that's their fault.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I would like to see that discussion evolve
Sure, yeah,
by
I would too.
including those perspectives.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
For sure. None of these people are really economists.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason that hasn't happened. I mean, Eric Weinstein.
But they sure
does-
speak with you know, perceived
Authority
authority
about-
on these subjects. So
Some-
that's
yeah.
why either stay out of it or, you know, let's have a robust debate, and it
Sure.
has to include critics or it's not a robust
Yeah.
debate.
I haven't heard them talk too much about the economy personally, so I don't really know.
Jordan Peterson.
That's most of what
He's
it's an issue I'm really interested in, so that's actually most of what I've looked for, and it's mainly Jordan Peterson who gets into that. Weinstein has a bit too, but
Weinstein.
obviously Weinstein, sorry.
Eric Weinstein is a pretty big authority on that because he manages Teal Capital, so he does know a lot about the economy. But
Right.
obviously, he's probably more capitalistic.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jordan Peterson has definitely talked about Marxism
Mhm.
and critique of Marxism. So it would be great to hear Richard Wolff debate him
I would
on that
love that
because
so
I
much.
think his main critiques are sort of from a psychological basis,
Mhm.
which makes sense. I mean, he's a psychologist, so
I'm stoked to get into
let's
that.
let's hear it. Let's do it.
Daniel, what was that point you were going to make earlier? Did you get cut off?
Oh, I did, but let's just keep going.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So before we leave public intellectuals and political commentators,
Yeah.
Real quick, just for those interested in the kind of left-wing perspective that I'm talking about, my two favorites that I think are on the more reliable side. So Secular Talk with Kyle Kalinski's, I think that's very good. One that's done by a comedian, so it's a lot more commentary than news. Jimmy Dore Show. I think Jimmy Dore's great. Both of them have been on the Joe Rogan Show, so you should check them out on Joe Rogan, Kyle Kalinske and Jimmy Dore. They're great as far as commentary goes. But yeah.
Okay. And I would like to add to that I really like Brett Weinstein a lot, and I think listening to his talks is really informative. He's got a lot of really good stuff. And I sent both of you, both Dan and Sean, a clip from him. I don't know if you guys watched
Yeah,
it.
I didn't get all the way through it, but I started with just the whole like day of walkout
Mhm.
stuff. So that
Yeah.
was
There's
really interesting.
there's a lot to know there. I'd actually like to send you guys a talk that he gave that was basically about like a reflection of that, and I think we should talk about that. That's actually something that Chris recommended that we talk about on the podcast. I think
Awesome.
there's a lot of really good commentary on the left in there and just the current political climate that we can get into.
But I am excited about the idea of these more leftist thinkers getting involved in this intellectual network, because now that Joe Rogan has had on Kyle Kalinske and Jimmy Dore,
Yeah.
Jimmy Dore has interviewed Chris Hedges, he's interviewed Richard Wolff, and now Richard Wolff knows about Jordan Peterson and is challenging him to a debate. So
Hell yeah.
I'm
Oh.
really excited about this kind of richening of the discussion.
Another interesting thing, now that we're getting nerdy as fuck and getting excited about possible debates between intellectuals in the future, apparently Brett Weinstein might be debating Richard Dawkins on the evolutionary advantages of religion.
Okay, another
Sounds
really
fucking
good
awesome
one.
to me.
One of the best debates I've ever seen was
Yeah.
between Chris Hedges and Richard Dawkins,
Okay.
talking about religion in general. That was absolutely incredible. And I think Chris Hedges did a good job poking through some of the holes in kind of like the new atheist movement and its blind spots in a way that most people aren't able to. But anyway, check that out. I thought that was really good.
Yeah. The new atheism, I think, goes a little too far in some critiques, but
we can also link all of this stuff in the video.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything we mentioned, I'm going to put in the description. So
Excellent.
just go ahead and look down, and I'll put them in order that we mentioned them.
Sweet. I'll send you some links. Cool. So I think that's about all I had to say on the intellectuals. I like the Weinsteins.
The first topic.
Yeah.
5.
I mean, it obviously branched into a lot of other topics, but holy fuck, yeah, we're slow. And we are definitely going to have to table some of this. So I guess the next question would be, what should we try to cover next? Because we may only get one other topic.
We're at 2.5 hours.
Guns.
Okay.
Does Sam Harris talk about guns?
He does. He actually has a full podcast where he kind of outlines his views on guns and gun control, and then he has another one where he has he has two other ones that kind of talk about violence in a tangential way. So he has a blog post on violence, which I'll give to Dan so he can link. And I think it's a really, really sober look at the world and how, like, mostly the U.S. world, I should say, but just like the possibility of violence, the recourses that people should have ready, and the sort of perspective people should have of violence and how to deal with it. I think he does a really good look at that. And then he has a podcast with Jocko Willink, which is he's a former Navy SEAL, and so that's an interesting perspective on the Iraq War in one regard, and also on violence. And then he has another one with a guy named Scott Reitz or something like that, who is a former SWAT officer, and he talks about it from the sort of like the police standpoint and how guns and gun control sort of they talk a little bit about that, but also they talk just about how the police are thought of and that kind of stuff. So I think that was a really good look at that.
We should definitely do a whole thing just on criminal justice.
That would be excellent.
But
I would
that's
like to
got to
get
be
into
another
that.
day.
But yeah, I mean, if we want to do guns, I'm totally down for that. I got a lot of shit on that.
I think that'd be a good one to do. Another one we should do if we don't